When in April 1997 it was announced that Martin Margiela had been appointed creative director of Hermes, it came as a surprise. This, after all, was the era of the superstar designer. Tom Ford at Gucci, John Galliano at Givenchy and then at Dior, Alexander McQueen at Givenchy, Stella McCartney at Chloe. Margiela founded his fashion house in 1988 with Jenny Mayans, and everyone who cared about his work, and we were and still are many, knows that the designer eschewed the spotlight, having learned from his time working alongside Gaultier that being the face of a fashion house comes at a price, one he was reluctant to pay. Post-Eurotrash, Gaultier was overlooked for the Dior job despite talent and an estimable pedigree. Margiela preferred his work to speak for itself. He and the loyal inner circle of creatives with which he surrounded himself guarded his anonymity fiercely. Equally unpredictable, as far as first impressions go, at least, was the choice of a designer who was very much perceived as central to fashion's avant-garde. Martin Margiela reworked vintage finds, from leather butcher's aprons to antique wedding dresses, based clothing around Stockman dummies, home furnishings and even Christmas tinsel. He turned more conventional fashion upside down and inside out, often literally, reversing seams and leaving edges to fray. He favored everyday materials, paper, calico, cheap lining fabrics, and cast beautiful friends and acquaintances as opposed to professional models for his shows, which took place in far-flung places with no seating plan, or at times, even seats. The Maison Martin Margiela label, meanwhile, a blank, white cotton square, seemed to question the very notion of designer fashion as status-driven. To the uninitiated, there was no way of knowing that a Maison Martin Margiela design was in fact designer. At Hermes, Margiela eschewed the spectacle-driven theatrics of late 90s fashion, focusing instead on the quiet power of restraint. He created collections that emphasized wearability, timelessness, and impeccable craftsmanship. His minimalist approach contrasted sharply with the flamboyant trends of the era, but this subtlety resonated with Hermes' ethos. Margiela redefined the concept of luxury as something understated yet profound. Central to Margiela's Hermes collections was his focus on the woman. He prioritized functionality and comfort, crafting pieces that were versatile and enduring. Margiela introduced a palette of neutral tones, black, beige, gray, and white, that allowed the quality of the materials and the elegance of the cuts to shine. This was a stark departure from the colorful prints and decorative excess often associated with Hermes at the time. Margiela applied his signature ingenuity to Hermes' heritage of exquisite craftsmanship. He designed reversible coats, modular knitwear, and multifunctional garments that could transform in purpose and style. These innovations catered to the modern woman who needed her wardrobe to be as adaptable as her lifestyle. One of his standout pieces was the double-faced cashmere coat, an embodiment of Hermes' artisanal mastery paired with Margiela's minimalist aesthetic. The coat, devoid of unnecessary adornments, was a triumph of quiet luxury, showcasing the fabric's quality and the precision of the tailoring. Margiela's Hermes collections transcended seasonal trends. Rather than focusing on fleeting fashion statements, he created garments that women could wear for years, even decades. This approach aligned perfectly with Hermes' philosophy of producing heirloom-quality pieces. While some critics initially questioned Margiela's subdued approach, his vision proved prophetic. Today his Hermès collections are celebrated as early examples of slow fashion, a movement that prioritizes sustainability and longevity in design. Simultaneously leading Maison Margiela, Margiela maintained a clear distinction between the two houses. While his eponymous label explored deconstruction, experimental fabrics, and conceptual designs, his work at Hermès was grounded in tradition and pragmatism. Yet subtle echoes of his Maison Margiela philosophy could be found in his Hermès collections. For example, he often used luxurious materials in unexpected ways, such as lining garments with cashmere or adding hidden functional details, reflecting his commitment to rethinking luxury. Margiela's time at Hermès marked a pivotal moment in fashion history. It challenged the perception that avant-garde designers could not succeed in traditional luxury houses. Margiela demonstrated that innovation doesn't always require reinvention, sometimes it's about refining what already exists. His Hermès collections remain highly sought after, with many pieces considered collector's items. Beyond their aesthetic appeal, these garments encapsulate a philosophy that continues to influence designers today: the idea that true luxury is rooted in craftsmanship, functionality, and timelessness. While Martin Margiela's tenure at Hermès is widely celebrated today, it was not without its criticisms and challenges. Margiela's minimalist approach was a stark departure from the more vibrant, print-heavy aesthetic many associated with Hermès in the preceding decades. His subdued color palette and focus on functionality left some critics and customers yearning for the brand's traditional exuberance. Those expecting bold statements felt that Margiela's collections lacked the visual drama typical of luxury fashion during the late 1990s and early 2000s. While Margiela's designs were celebrated by fashion insiders for their timelessness and craftsmanship, they didn't immediately translate into soaring sales. His understated approach, while intellectually appealing, was perhaps too restrained for some of Hermès' clientele, who expected a more overt expression of luxury. The brand's growth during his tenure was steady but not as explosive as competitors adopting flashier trends. Hermès was historically known for its iconic silk scarves and intricate patterns. Margiela's preference for neutral tones and minimalist aesthetics meant that these elements were largely absent from his collections. Some felt this approach alienated loyal Hermès customers who cherished the brand's rich visual identity. Margiela's vision for Hermès was rooted in timeless design, but it required a level of fashion literacy that not all consumers possessed. Some audiences, especially in the late 90s, struggled to appreciate his subtlety, mistaking it for a lack of innovation. His work was often seen as too intellectual for the broader market. Margiela's personal reclusiveness, combined with his understated designs, sometimes made it difficult for Hermès to communicate the value and innovation behind his collections. Without a compelling narrative to accompany his work, some of the deeper ingenuity, like the reversible garments or modular knits, went unnoticed by the average customer. Margiela's tenure coincided with a period in fashion dominated by bold, logo-heavy luxury driven by designers like Tom Ford at Gucci and John Galliano at Dior. Margiela's rejection of trends made Hermès seem out of step with the zeitgeist to some consumers. His refusal to engage in seasonal spectacle worked against the highly competitive backdrop of early 2000s fashion. There were whispers of internal tensions during Margiela's time at Hermès. Balancing his creative vision with the expectations of the house's leadership and clientele may have been a challenge, particularly since Hermès had a deeply established identity long before his arrival. While these criticisms existed at the time, Margiela's Hermès collections have aged exceptionally well, often viewed as visionary in hindsight. However, the understated nature of his work during a period of high-octane fashion meant that his brilliance was not fully appreciated by all at the time.